Hey everyone, it's State of Search. Thank you so much for having me back this year. This is my third State of Search, but I'm really excited. Not just because State of Search is one of my favorite conferences every single year, but this is the first time that I've had the pleasure of talking about a better way to Bing. I think this is the first time that State of Search has ever had a session dedicated to Bing ads. And as it turns out, this is my second favorite thing to talk about in all of paid search. So I'm really excited to be here and talk about a few tips to find success on Microsoft advertising. We know that Microsoft and Bing is just so slightly different than Google. It's, of course, this smaller network. It's got a few different quirks and optimizations towards it. And so it's actually one of my favorite things to talk about. But I know that I'm talking to an audience of experienced PPC professionals, and even myself, I love Bing, but it's my second favorite thing to talk about in the industry. And that's because, like you, like most of us, Bing is always going to be the second favorite thing for us to talk about. Because if I know paid search marketers, our absolute favorite thing to talk about is ourselves, right? So figured I'd do the same. My name is Mark Irvine, and I'm the new director of paid media at Search Lab. I'm really enjoying the new role, but I come from a background. I actually come from a unique background. I used to be a data scientist at a company that managed over 30,000 Google, Bing, and Facebook accounts. What's really cool about that is when you have 30,000 individual accounts, you're able to see not just how an individual advertiser is approaching testing, particularly testing a new network like Bing, but you're able to see how advertisers in different industries and different types of clients begin to approach testing. And you're able to see exactly what types of approaches really guarantee them success and what types of approaches do people often struggle with. So I've had the pleasure of doing a lot of analysis on that, and I'm really excited to share that data with you today. Now, if you've seen me at State of Search in the past, you know that I all too often talk about that one time last year that PPC Hero named me the most influential PPC expert of 2019. But this is the first time that I get to share a little other news as is relevant to this topic is Microsoft Advertising also named me their influencer of the year last year. I've had the pleasure of partnering very closely with Microsoft, and I've shared a lot of the data with them, and we've gone back and forth about what kinds of approaches here really do and don't work when we compare them to Google. So I'm really excited to share a lot of that with you. Now, of course, I mentioned that I work closely with the team at Microsoft. Um, Microsoft loves Google, and they love the fact that they can tell advertisers that their system is very similar to Google. In fact, it's a value pitch, right? They get a lot of people to advertise on their network with the promise that they can just import their Google campaigns right over to Bing. And we know the fact, like all of us, we all learned Google ads first. And then once we got comfortable with Google Ads, we looked at Microsoft advertising and we figured it out really quick, right? It's a search network. You go in, you write keywords. The keywords share very similar match types. They serve very similar search ads, identical search ads. We pay per click, we bid in all the same bidding algorithms that we're ever so used to. And even the campaign structures with the campaigns, the ad groups within the campaign, hosting keywords and ads together, identical, right? So a lot of us can feel very, very knowledgeable at Microsoft advertising without spending a whole lot of time in it. And we see the fact that Microsoft pitches Bing very well. Not only the fact does it reach a whole lot of users, but a lot of people, particularly as Windows 10 rolls out, Windows 10 has a lot of Americans experimenting more with Bing. In fact, today, a well-known secret is that half of Americans are a little bisexual, meaning that they search using both networks. They use both Google and Bing throughout the course of their day because they're typing in to their Windows 10 device. They're using Cortana. They're using Office as their email system. They're doing a lot of searches in Edge or Explorer or all these other places where Bing is the default search engine. A lot of people are in fact Binging when they don't even know that they're Binging it. And so advertisers do see very positive results on average, they see a 45% higher click-through rate, about a third lower cost per click, and similarly about a third lower CPA when you compare to their same campaigns over in Google Ads. There's a lot of positive things to say about advertising on on Microsoft advertising. And we see the fact that as Microsoft turns 11 this year, they're correct in celebrating a huge achievement that 500,000 businesses use Microsoft advertising for their search ads. But even when we look at a figure that impressive, it's worth putting into the perspective that that's a small fraction of the advertisers who are using Google Ads. When you compare 500,000 to 20 million plus who use Google Ads, there's a lot of questions. If they're so similar, then why do so few advertisers use Microsoft advertising? And why isn't performance nearly identical across the two of them? And so my first piece of advice today is if you're currently not doing Microsoft advertising, it's very easy to get ahead of your competition. Getting on Microsoft ads is your first step to being successful at Microsoft advertising. And so if you're on Microsoft ads, you can take a lot of advantage of that lack of competition. Not only do fewer competitors mean that cost to compete is appreciably lower, but you're actually able to not just show the same keywords or even show the same keywords in a higher position at a lower cost per click, but less competition also might mean that you're able to advertise on keywords that you wouldn't traditionally be able to afford on Google. So a lot of us might be priced out of some of our very top funnel keywords or some of the most expensive keywords on Google, but could very easily afford it on Bing because of that lack of competition. And pro tip, because a lot of your competitors aren't going to be on Bing, it's very easy for you to go about bidding on your competitor terms on Bing, even if that's something that you wouldn't be able to afford or wouldn't be ROI positive doing on Google. You'll be surprised when you compare that 19.5 million people who are on Google but not Bing. You'll be surprised at what types of businesses don't think to run any ads on Bing at all. Here I took a screenshot of someone searching for Facebook, and you don't see a Facebook ad, or you don't see a Facebook protecting their own search term right there, whereas you know that they're doing that over on Google. So consequently, all these ads about people, all these searches about how to advertise on Facebook, you see Yelp, you see LinkedIn, you see Twitter, all buying ads right on Facebook's terms just because Facebook isn't serving an ad there. And so it's a very easy way to steal some of the market share back. So feel free, take the Zoom, put me in a corner, and do a quick search for not just your brand name on Bing, but also some of your competitors' brand names on Bing. And you'll be surprised at the lack of ads that show up there and the opportunity you have on the network. Now, as we talk about launching on Bing, we really have to have a conversation about how quickly we can find success here and what's a better way to approach success on Bing. And so this is where being a data scientist was a little challenging because you can very easily tell people the story of the average customer on Microsoft advertising has a higher click-through rate, a lower cost per click, a lower CPA. And that's true. Those averages are very true, and we see the fact that people do have an average performance better on Bing. But averages have a tendency not to lie, but to obscure more meaningful data. And that's because of something called a survivor bias. We see the fact that a lot of people who don't have better performance on Bing actually get frustrated with Bing very quickly and very often abandon the network. So they'll launch campaigns on Bing and they'll very quickly, if they don't get the results they're looking for, they very frequently give up and just go back to just advertising on Google. That's my number one thing that I hear from people when you're talking about Bing is, hey, I tried Bing, it didn't really work. It's actually a real trend, both when you're looking at client data, but when I worked with Microsoft, about a quarter of all small businesses, when they first launched their campaigns on Bing, they give up and they pause their campaigns within the first month because they don't see the performance that they expected. Even a little longer out, within 90 days, nearly half of people who start advertising on Microsoft Advertising stop. And so, although once you get past that 90-day, you actually see them really be loyal and stick around and have really great results, that first 30 and 90 days is a really tough place for a lot of advertisers, and they don't know how to find success on the network. What's this? Oh, is this the elephant in the Zoom? Okay, the elephant in the Zoom is saying that Bing is much smaller than Google. Guys, you already know that. It's kind of a dumb thing to say. We already know that. You didn't even need to sign in and watch me tell you that today. But what that means that we need to approach the network a little bit differently, knowing that Bing is going to be so much smaller than Google. Let's say we optimistically think that Bing has a third the audience for us. Maybe that's not true. But even if that's the case, then that means for us to get the same amount of data to begin optimizing on Bing ads, we'd need to test for 3 times longer than we would test on Google. Or if we were to plan to test for 2 weeks on Google when we launch a new campaign or test a new ad or something like that, often we say we need 2 weeks of data to get 2 weeks of time to get data on Google. On Bing, that means we would need 6 weeks if we took the same approach. A lot of people actually prefer to test for a full month on Google, which means that we would need a full quarter to get the same amount of data over on Bing. So knowing that that approach towards testing is going to take so much longer on Bing, we need a different approach towards launching and testing campaigns on Bing. And my approach is something that a lot of people get upset at when I first suggest it. But I highly encourage when you first launch your campaigns on Bing to plan to fail fast. Because we know the fact that we won't get the same results on Bing right away, and testing is going to take so much longer. So to get actionable data quickly, we want to use the maximize clicks bidding strategy for the first 2 weeks or so of launching on Bing. Now, I know maximize clicks isn't anyone's favorite bidding strategy. It's not geared to get you conversions. It's not geared to optimize your campaigns in the long run. But by using maximize clicks, we'll get a lot of data very quickly, and we'll be able to learn a lot very quickly as well. Once we have 2 weeks of a lot of data using maximize clicks, we'll quickly be able to see which keywords, which bids, which targeting, which devices, which audiences on Bing are attracted to our offer and our ads, and which ones are really poor fits for us. And using that data, that 2 weeks of data that we get using maximize clicks, we can finally make some optimization choices much faster than if we were just use the same bidding strategy and the same approach that we would traditionally use on Google. After 2 weeks, at that point, we can make a change to manual bidding or use a smart bidding strategy to really allow Microsoft to optimize those campaigns for us. And speaking about optimization, my third strategy is about using automation for a lot of the optimizations that you simply won't make on Bing. Okay, so he's back. The elephant in the Zoom is going to be real with us. Most of us are going to spend more time and more money in Google Ads than Bing. I love Bing, but even still, I spend most of my day in Google Ads, and that's the case for everyone here. So how do we go about making sure that we can make the same optimizations that we make over between Google and Bing? Now, I can't spend more time in my day. That's certainly not on the table. But what we see is that inactivity in Microsoft is really unfortunately common. When we look across both advertisers and agencies, very, very few people are making changes on not just a daily basis, but even a weekly or a monthly basis. We see that unless we see about 2/3 of advertisers and agencies don't make a change within a Bing account over the course of a quarter. And so what happens when you do that is, of course, the fact that if you're not making changes in Bing, it's not going to be getting better. And all too often, you're making a lot of changes in Google. And Google, as you make those changes, those campaigns will perform better. And then Google is just start going to perform better and Bing's going to continue to remain where it is, right? That's going to be a challenge when you're evaluating whether or not this is a good campaign or a good network to stay on. And unfortunately, a lot of companies fail this. It's not unique to small businesses, but the simple work that you do to update your ads, your extensions, your negatives, a lot of that's just no-brainers. Here, I did a search for Dallas hotels and same company, Priceline. It's not a small company. They're advertising across both Google and Bing. Good for them. They're taking that first step. But looking across them, they've got these two different ads on these networks. Dallas hotels from $35 and Dallas hotels from $20. Now, one of these ads is just factually wrong. And I'm going to take a shot in the dark and say that they didn't update Bing and forget Google, right? I'm going to assume that someone just forgot to update this Bing ad. And so consequently, it's going to perform poorly when people are expecting $20 hotel rooms. Click on that ad and then everything's nearly double the price, right? So an easy way for us to automate this and to keep ahead of these challenges is to schedule reoccurring imports from Google Ads. The idea here, when you drop into the import campaigns, you can not just import your campaigns once to set them up, but you can schedule regular recurring imports to catch all the changes you make from Google and bring them over to Bing as well. A lot of these changes are just simply no-brainers, and you want to set this up to be done every day. So as you work through your Google Ads account and you make optimizations there, you make minor changes to keep your campaigns up to date, you don't even need to sign into Bing to make sure that they're being done. Now, you won't want to import everything, but some of the things that you do every single day, things like updating your ad copy for your existing ad groups, adding new negative keywords to your ad groups campaigns and negative keyword lists, updating your labels, managing your ad extensions. You're not going to wake in the middle of the night and think about your call out extensions on Microsoft Advertising. Just import those over and you never have to think about them again. Similarly, your Google Merchant Center, if you're running a shopping campaign, you can just import all the changes from your Google Merchant Center over to Bing, and it's like running one campaign in Google that then just extends over to Bing. It's fantastic. You don't need to worry about your inventory being mismatched across the board. Just by regularly importing these campaign basics, we see that advertisers saw a 15% decrease in their CPA without ever having to do any additional work in Microsoft Advertising. Effectively, this just allows you to set it and forget it on some of the most simple things, so you're not losing money on dumb things like negative keywords you've already gone and excluded from your Google Ads campaigns. Now, as you want to start talking about taking things to the next step, really, you want to begin to strategically manage the differences between Google and Bing here. And so there's a lot of things you do want to import over from Google into Bing, but you won't want to import things like your bids or your budgets. Now, we know the fact that these campaigns, because there's less competition, the auction dynamics are so different across the two of them, these campaigns will perform differently than how you're used to seeing them on Google. For the most part, they'll perform better, but you'll want to adjust your bids and your budgets so that you can evaluate that and make those accommodations as you see individual keywords, ad groups, and campaigns struggle and succeed. The keywords across the two are slightly different as well. Although they're very similar match types, Bing's broad match reaches 70% more unique queries than Google's broad match. And so if you're on the broad match blinds, for instance, on Google, you'd get traffic, not just for blinds, but for shades and curtains. But on Bing, you might get traffic for window treatments and windows even. Similarly, the keyword LASIK on broad match. On Google, you might get things like misspellings of LASIK or refractive lens surgery. On Bing, you'll get a lot more generic terms, search terms like fixed vision, vision treatment, and eye surgery, things that are much more broad than what you're used to seeing from Google's broad match. And so that gives us a few strategic options. Bing might need more negative keywords than Google, and that actually might help you identify new negative keywords for Google as well. But Bing also could be used to find new keywords for Google Ads as you see these broad match keywords bring in some traffic. So whether or not you want to include broad match even in Bing is its own conversation. But if you are using it, then you want to make sure you're evaluating your Bing search terms because it may have new ideas for new negative keywords or additional keywords. And speaking of reviewing keywords, all of us are all too familiar with the fact that Google recently stopped showing a lot of search term data for what it considers its low volume or its insignificant search volume terms. That's, of course, infuriating when you see something like this and out of 21 clicks, you get data on 3 clicks worth of search terms. Luckily, Microsoft Advertising hasn't made that change and doesn't plan to make that change. Bing's search term report still shows everything. And now, because Google isn't, you actually might find Bing search term reports far more useful than Google because it's going to give you a whole lot more data. It's going to give you everything that's coming through Bing. And that's going to allow you to add new negative keywords over in Google as well. Now, when you compare Google and Bing, now Bing, Google keeps telling us it's the year of mobile. It is the majority of their traffic comes from mobile. And we see that's reflected that 69% of Google search traffic does come through a mobile device. Microsoft Advertising and Bing is a desktop first search engine. It sits on our Windows devices, which are traditionally PCs. And so consequently, it has the exact opposite skew. 63% of Microsoft advertising search traffic comes through a desktop device. And so because it attracts a very different type of traffic, you'll actually want to think about desktop users first on Bing than necessarily what we're used to the mobile first world of Google. How that changes your approach towards driving phone calls or a CTA or a landing page or specifically a device bid adjustment, it's really worth being aware that they are attracting very different types of traffic from the get-go. And finally, as you talk about building out an audience strategy on Bing, know the fact that Google and Bing have slightly different audiences. Now, Bing does have a remarketing audience, and you can remarket to users using audiences, but your Google audiences won't import over automatically. And so if that's a remarketing audience or a customer match audience or what have you, you need to create that list separately in Microsoft and upload that in to import it over. You'll very often see people think that they're bringing over an RLSA campaign and that list won't follow them over to Microsoft Ads. Similarly, in-market audiences. Both Google and Microsoft have hundreds of in-market audiences, but they're slightly different. Google, for instance, has an in-market audience for runners and running equipment, whereas Microsoft just has it for activewear. You might have to review and find a more appropriate audience over on Microsoft. Microsoft also has a lot more audiences that are more of a B2B focus than Google's B2C focus. And finally, I mean, you can't ignore Clippy. You want to use Microsoft's unique optimizations that Google Ads doesn't specifically offer. A favorite of mine is the Publishers Report. So if you're familiar with running search partners in either Google or in Bing, unfortunately in Google, you can't view individual performance by individual search partner. On Microsoft, you can run what's called a Publishers Report, and it'll give you the performance of every single search partner, every single website that your ads ran across. And if you see something that's performing poorly, you can go into your advanced settings and you can exclude individual websites from showing your search ads. Bing also has two unique ad extensions. The review extension, which was retired from Google a few years ago, still runs right there on Microsoft advertising. So if you've got solid reviews, you can plug them right into Bing and you get this great review extension. And an action extension, which includes a call to action that's going to allow you to have someone reserve a table or book an appointment or schedule something right directly from the app. But it also allows people it increases your click-through rate significantly. And finally, and most excitingly, Bing recently released their LinkedIn audiences to all advertisers. So Microsoft owns both Bing and LinkedIn. And if you wanted to target users based off of their professional activity on LinkedIn, be that their company, their industry, or their job function, you could begin to feed that information into Microsoft advertising, and you could target that very specific B2B audience over on Microsoft advertising. And unfortunately, that's not something you're able to do on Google yet. So I just talked very quickly a lot about Bing. I'm really excited to give you a quick recap. The biggest things I'd say is that Bing is smaller than Google, so prepare to test differently on Microsoft advertising. You want to learn quickly and optimize later. As you make changes to your Google campaigns, you want to embrace automation and import over a lot of those routine changes into Bing on a regular cadence. And finally, we know that Bing is different than Google in many aspects. So be specific in how you manage those differences if you want to find success. And with that, guys, it was really thrilling to do this virtually. I'm available for some Q&A, and I hope to see you all next year.